Hello and welcome to Why Are We Like This, the true crime podcast that treats Florida like the active crime scene it is. I'm David Quinones, of course, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Tomas Kennedy. Tomas, how's it going?
It's good. Back from Argentina, World Cup champions. Let's go.
And, of course, Gerald Doherty joins me as well. Jer.
Hello, how are you?
So today we are graced with our very first returning guest. Can you believe that? We have our first returning guest. It feels like we just started this show and we've already got two-timers. And it also represents a trifecta of Eskamani sister appearances on Why Are We Like This, which is something that we can hang our hats on. Ida Eskamani, welcome back to Why Are We Like This?
Thank you. It's good to be here. Just cannot keep me away.
You know, I had a little thing. We're gonna be talking about the Florida legislative session, and we're gonna jump into that in a moment. But I just want to take everyone's temperature really quick on an issue that nobody probably was really talking about. But I don't know, Ida, if you're much of a Beyonce fan or not. But I don't know if you guys followed a lot of the discourse of the Beyonce performing in Saudi Arabia for $30 million or anything like that. I don't have a lot to say about that, but I did notice on social media, Florida was catching a whole bunch of stray bullets because people were saying, "Oh, have you have a problem with Beyonce performing in in Saudi Arabia? But have you heard of a place called Florida?" And I just want to say, Florida's bad, but we have lots of problems. But are we really at that point where we are literally considered in the realm of LGBTQ rights in with Saudi Arabia? That's really fucking bad. I don't know if that's much of an apt comparison. And before the news cycle jumps away from Beyonce, I wanted to mention it. I don't know. Did any of you guys follow that story at all or no?
I'm sorry. Maybe I'm stupid.
This sounds just like
here.
Yeah.
No, they were saying, okay, so Beyonce.
I get what they're saying. Human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, but what about the human rights abuses in Florida? This is
right, because nobody
class, I live in Seattle type shit.
Yes.
They've never been to Florida. They've never been to Saudi Arabia either.
I think it's
they think that we're literally killing people here.
Right.
Sorry.
Well,
I mean, that's not.
But banning gender affirming care is effectively murdering trans people. So I do think it's fair to paint comparisons in the sense of a lot of folks that I know in the LGBTQ community left countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia seeking freedom and refuge, and now come here and face similar bigotry and attacks. And of course, at the hands of the state that's really trying to erase communities. So unfortunately, I think there is somewhat of a scary kind of comparison happening. However, I think often those comparisons are made by folks who aren't actually thinking in that critical of a way. So I think that's also a very important point to make as well. But it is very scary what's happening in Florida. And as we know, Florida is importing this stuff from other countries, right? When you look at anti-protest laws, LGBTQ issues, women's rights, I mean, none of these things are what, my parents came to America for. There's reasons why they left Iran and they're happening here. So it's definitely alarming in that sense.
So are folks saying that Beyonce shouldn't perform in Florida? That was the point that they're trying to make.
They're saying that she should be immune from criticism for performing in Saudi Arabia, because if you're going to start going down that primrose path of places that are unkind or target LGBTQ populations, then look no further than Florida, I think is their point. And she obviously, I don't think she's performed in a long time. I'm not a huge Beyonce fan. No, please don't kill me. Don't castigate me, people. But I'm not aware of her touring schedule. I don't think she's been here for a while, but what people are trying to say is then she shouldn't. Then you could make the same criticism about her performing in Florida.
I am. I don't know if these people were around when the Iraq War was going on. You could go ahead.
No, I think she should not perform in Saudi Arabia and she should not perform in Florida. I think it's reprehensible to perform in both places.
T's coming in very prescriptive. He's like, no,
it does seem like the washing of the hands from residents in the 49 other states is all I'll say. There's a lot that the United States does in terms of human rights that's not good, but I think they are being very they're not wrong to point out DeSantis' human rights violations, but I do think it is a little bit of that's what happens over there. My hands are clean. I do think there's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah, like we're gonna start seeing posts from like legislators that are like, weapons like this don't belong on normal city streets. They belong in Florida, or something like that. They're gonna be instead of right now, they're like they belong weapons. These are weapons of war. They belong in in someplace uncivilized, like the Sunshine State. So
well, and I think that is often those kind of comparisons are coming from folks who also have strands of Islamophobia and maybe like discredit what white Christian nationalism is doing in this country as well. And so it just kind of runs the whole thing. But I generally think artists, have the rights to play where they want, but also they can leverage their power in many different ways. But sometimes that means playing in a space that they are challenging the status quo. And other times it means boycotting it. So I think, they should also have the tools to use as artists. And someone like Beyonce, who I'm not in part of the Beehive, but I do admire Beyonce and all the different things she stands for and what she does and how she inspires a lot of young girls. So you could also argue her presence there is actually really challenging, a status quo. And but I think that's for the discourse, to take and see where it lands.
Ida's just waiting for the Beyonce collab with Aquabats, and then she's going to be fully into the Beehive.
That was a Scott.
So onto
didn't know.
Onto our Scott. That's Tomas and Jared just like.
I know Pool Party.
Okay,
I know that one song.
I actually hate ska, but I like the Aquabats because they're funny. They're fun.
So onto our main topic, which is we asked Ida on to talk with us about the upcoming Florida legislative session, which is upon us. The session begins on March 7th. Runs through May 5th, and will convene in maybe its most ultra radical incarnation since, I don't know, maybe like Reconstruction. Here's a breakdown of the composition. The Florida House of Representatives is 84-35 Republican advantage, and in the Senate, 28-12. If you think those numbers sound a little weird for a state that's supposed to be a 50-50 state, yeah, it is kind of weird to have it that lopsided. And the committees are already sort of starting to meet, right, T? I'm gonna hand this off to you to kind of break us into this topic.
No, Ida, so basically we just want to hear from you. What do you think it's the worst that's coming down the pipeline?
Wow, what a question. I'm laughing so I don't cry, just for the record.
Yeah.
What other way is there to put it, we have super minorities on both chambers.
Right.
We have ineffective Democratic leaders, both chambers. You know what I mean? We have an ineffective Democratic Party. How bad is it going to get is our question to you.
You pose a big question. So I think, if I could paint it a little bit for you, tomorrow morning is the first hearing for House Bill 1, which is a massive expansion of voucher schools in Florida. So this bill would basically cost public schools $4 billion. It's tied to a coordinated assault on public education to ultimately defund and privatize our education system. And it ultimately creates a universal voucher system. It allows families, regardless of income, to use public vouchers to go to charter schools. And of course, basically publicly subsidized private schools. And so this bill was rolled out, I want to say it was either late last week or early this week, because time is just not on my side right now in the sense of what day it is. But this bill has its first hearing tomorrow morning in the House. It's not even been filed in the Senate, but the House is fast tracking it. And it's directly connected to Christopher Rufo's efforts. And you're seeing these kind of bills across the country in state capitals as well. And in many ways, you could argue it's the final kill shot on public education. And it's being heard even before session officially starts. And so at this point in session, about 400 or so bills have been introduced. Usually around 3,000 or so total get introduced, but then also throughout session, the majority can basically put a bill out of thin air into committee. So even when the filing deadline happens, you still don't know all the threats that are there. And so that to paint a little bit of a picture. The other thing I'll note, and I'm happy to dig in, well, not happy, but I can dig into any of these pieces. But the other thing I'll note to your point about the supermajority is because we don't have the 3/5 threshold anymore, there are things that the legislature can do now that they couldn't do before. So specifically constitutional amendments. So they're called joint resolutions. Basically, in order for the legislature to put an amendment on the ballot for voters to consider, they need 3/5 support. So it's a higher threshold than an average bill. And so these are things that we've defeated in the past. Things like putting to the ballot an amendment that would require all future ballot initiatives to pass with a higher threshold. So right now it's 60%. There's a bill currently filed that would raise it to 66.6%. So think about a lot of the big wins we had: minimum wage, medical cannabis, clean water, conservation, all these different pieces, fair districts. Most of those passed with between 60 to 65%. I think medical cannabis was the only one that was over 67%. And so basically I want to put to the ballot this amendment that would make it virtually impossible to pass a lot of the proactive policies via direct democracy in Florida. And it's being backed by some of the biggest businesses in Florida who've been trying to pass this for years. And every year we've been able to stop it. But now, if it's on a partisan line, we don't have the votes. And they've already putting a lot of different of these joint resolutions introduced. They've got stuff around school board races, making them partisan, making the school board limit. So they're putting all these different things on to go towards the ballot that we used to be able to stop, and now we can't. Just to paint you some more depressing things.
Before we leave that topic of HB1, because I think Gerald, before we started recording, had rightly identified that this seems to be the one where they're putting a lot of their chips behind, and we were talking before other folks joined on the call about this idea where, and I think we've talked about this before on the podcast too, but it bears repeating, that they're trying to create a two-tiered system, right? They're trying to create a system where if you are somebody who can't afford and who has the discretionary income or wealth to put your kids someplace other than a public school, you feel the gravity and you feel the hard push in your back to do that. I was telling Gerald about the experience that we've had as parents in Miami-Dade public schools of administrators of school of assorted schools, not just us but friends of ours, going into the principal's or the administrator's office and with a gripe or a concern or feedback, and walking out with literature for a charter school, being basically told like, hey, you should go, oh, if you don't like it here, then why don't you try this? Oh, did you know that there's vouchers, there's programs, there's ways for you to afford it? And what goes unspoken is, and I think most people listening to this podcast probably understand that, but and I refer you back to our episode with Jen Berkshire and also Jen Cousins. If you do that, you're weakening all those dollars are dollars that are coming out of chronically underfunded public schools. This isn't money that Ron DeSantis is conjuring into existence for the purposes of some new venture to make a bunch of money for, Manny Diaz Jr.'s, portfolio of ownership that he has for all these charter schools. It's money that's coming at the expense of that, like, let's call it what it is, the underclass of kids who are being, funneled into substandard public schools systems that like used to maybe be okay and are just getting worse and worse every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have friends who are teachers, and they can't currently even authorize lice checks for their students if they don't have parental consent forms signed. They can't offer Band-Aids. They can't Baker Act students who are actively trying to take their lives on their campus, but they can't do anything because they don't have the right under the Don't Say Gay and Trans bill. And all these students are often low wealth students. They're students of color. They're students whose parents are working class, who can't be as engaged as affluent parents like my parents, where school was like my daycare, right? And so many of these laws being put in place are designed to make sure that families like mine can't succeed. So it's families of a certain class, of a certain way of thinking, can access all these resources and continue to make wealth while the rest of the kids are left behind. And the other piece that I think you're alluding to is the fact that there's several individual fights around public education, right? You have queer kids, you have teaching Black history, you have banning books, you have union busting, you have this expansion of the voucher system. So we feel like we're fighting all these individual fights, siloed off, but it's actually one big fight that the far right has that's all coordinated. And it's all about underfunding and privatizing public education. And to your point, David, around chronically underfunded schools, that is by design. They're making public schools underfunded and undesirable. They're chasing teachers out. They're chasing bus drivers out. They're making it so that our public schools are failing. And then parents feel like they have no choice but to, here's a public voucher. Let me take my kid to a private school. And then often these private schools are unaccountable and kids are not even learning, or they're being indoctrinated, or they're religious schools. And that could also discriminate, which is an important thing to know. These schools can choose who they take. So a lot of kids with disabilities, kids from different communities aren't accepted. LGBTQ kids are not accepted. And so again, it's all about creating this sort of secondary class of citizen. And we know education is the key to economic prosperity, and it's being cut off with so many Floridians.
And not only creating situations where, like you were saying, kids like you, or like kids that come from families like yours, couldn't succeed in the current system, crushing public education with their left hand and then dangling a voucher saying, I have the way out of this for you with my right hand, and then making you feel grateful that you gave me an opportunity to get out of the school that you were trying to destroy intentionally. I was like, if there was like a Democrat that was doing to the military what Republicans do to education, there would be public hearings tomorrow. Like, it's like that no one would accept it on the right, that you would like deliberately siphon off money from something that they care about and try to get it into the pockets of people who donate to their political campaigns by and large.
That's another really great point, is when you follow the money, there's so many grifters profiteering off of this. And that's the thing. Public education is $1 billion industry. And so all these like greedy little, goons want their little dirty paws on it. And like, it's so gross at the expense of our education. And so, for so long, right, like advocates like us have been continuing to ring the alarm and defend public education. And the thing is, across the country, you've seen a lot of these attacks have been losing campaign strategies, right? And so I do think it's important in Florida that we, again, center how beloved public education is in this fight, and tell those stories and lift up our kids and parents and teachers who really love public ed, and not fall for different traps. But this feels like the most transparent just effort to completely end public education. Whereas, again, all these other fights have also been targeting vulnerable communities, and they have all these like ways to lie and spin the story. But this one seems pretty clear. They want to end it. And same again when it talks to ending collective bargaining for teachers, right? It's all about ending public ed. And also, as we know, just basic democratic infrastructures. We know, of course, unions are really fundamental to that as well. So they're also cutting the source of funding for a lot of democratic infrastructure as well. So it's all a power grab at the expense of our kids, and good public jobs that pay well, pay better than non-union jobs, I should say, because teachers are also chronically underfunded. And actually, I will say there was one really good bill introduced, I think today, by Senator Berman and Representative Edmond, that would raise teacher salaries to $65,000. And so members of the Minority Caucus are putting forward really proactive, good ideas that, of course, won't get a hearing, but they are putting things forward to shift the narrative and remind Floridians what world we could be living in versus what the majority is currently putting forward.
Yeah, and Ida, I think this is part of a larger neoliberal project of underfunding and sabotaging public institutions that, we've seen across the United States, but is exacerbated in Florida, right? I mean, you saw it, for example, with the unemployment system, right? It's about creating mistrust in the public and the perception that government can't do anything, right? It's that Ronald Reagan quote that the worst thing you can hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And then they privatize everything, and it just becomes, a free-for-all of grifters that do things worse than the government, but they line their pockets while doing it. But I
fill the void. Yeah.
I did want to touch on something that you brought up, because I do think that, yes, we're talking about the vouchers and that aspect of it, but I think the attack on public education and public higher education or public universities is pretty intersectional, to use a word that the right despises, in the sense that this anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ stuff is also designed to create a culture of fear, not just among students, but among teachers and the professionals that move forward our institutions, this climate that you can't have certain books in our school libraries, and if they find pornography or what they deem to be pornography in these books, you can get hit with a 3rd-degree felony. And even the fact that they're attacking teachers' unions, right, that are meant to be there to protect teachers and to create rail guards and safeguards around the profession that makes it more attractive for people, right? So I think it's like a very, I hate to say, well put together, cohesive, coordinated, and dare I say intersectional attack on the profession and the institution, meant to dismantle it from a lot of different angles and approaches.
Ironically, intersectionality, that word is actually one of the criteria words that they look for in disallowing media, in disallowing specifically books. But like if a book has it speaks to that word, that's like one of their red letter words that they being the conservative side of our legislature and their apparatchiks with it throughout the Department of Education. Those books that say the word intersectionality are getting pulled out. I'm sorry, Ida, what were you going to say?
No, you're fine. I mean, you're 100% right, Tomas, or T, as I say you're called. And I studied sociology in college, and when I came, my parents are working class. My mom worked at Kmart. My dad worked at multiple restaurants to get his degree at UCF. And I went to UCF as well, public university. And I studied political science and sociology. And I made a living for myself fighting alongside folks for our collective rights. And if it wasn't for this education, I wouldn't be where I was today. And so I take this stuff very personally in the sense of these are job creators as well. Like there are, and just to like the sense of our civic society, these areas of research are so critical. But ultimately what the far right sees is all of this as a threat. And also they see, of course, education as a tool to make money, and it's taxpayer dollars that are being used for it. And so just as we're seeing with public ed with K through 12, when it comes to higher education, it's all by design to make sure that people like them, people who think like them, people who look like them, people from places of wealth can keep succeeding and, go to schools that align with their far right extremist ideology, while the rest of us don't have the same access to success. And specifically, of course, LGBTQ and trans students, Black students, low income students, students with disabilities are all disproportionately impacted, as always. But it's specifically to say this is a class of people that will just continue to be minions to the ruling class, and the rest of us, they'll keep succeeding, and the rest of us are just suffering below or being brainwashed and not realize that we actually have power to change this, right? And so the other thing that I know y'all know is everything the far right accuses us of doing, they are doing. And that's not just projecting or gaslighting. That's an actual tactic in like human rights law, accusations in a mirror. It's a propaganda tool used by the far right to accuse your victim of something you were doing to incite violence. And so they're also leveraging propaganda tools throughout. And this has definitely been decades in the making. You can even go as well back in the 70s, the Lewis Powell memo that the Chamber of Commerce put out about how they wanted to take over universities, and they've done a good job. And look at all the different buildings and college campuses named after some of the most evil corporations like in the world, right? So again, a lot of this has been happening for a while, and you basically have fascist corporations, aligned together to make this happen. I'll give one quick example too, just because it's a timely thing. I'm sure folks saw it this morning. Eric Szilagyi of Florida Power and Light is retiring. Seems like a really early retirement if you ask me, but he's on the board of governors of the state of Florida. He has been a deciding voice on our education system. The Walmart lobbyist is on the Department of Education State Board. The AT&T president is on the Department of Education State Board, which is another very just good examples, again, of how the governor is such a grifter, because he's literally appointed and allowed these corporate executives and lobbyists on key state boards and doesn't do anything about it, right? In fact, he's appointed many of them. And so, yeah,
No,
I could go on.
he's very much in favor of that. I was looking at the board makeup when I saw recently that the Broward County I guess the school board or the because I think the superintendent situation over there is kind of sketchy up in Broward right now. But the decision was made that they would acquiesce and that they would come in line with this threat against their against their state funding. And I was just out of curiosity looking at the backgrounds of all those individuals that you just mentioned, that state board of education. This is just like it looked like LinkedIn. These are just like corporate goons. These are like lobbyists, and it highlights this problem. And I think it's one that we're going to see common through a lot of these issues that we want to talk about with you upcoming in the legislative session, where the other side doesn't have. I mean, like you can say, yeah, teachers unions are, strong or not strong, but the other side doesn't really, like the advocates of public education don't have a lobby. Not really, not in a way where we're going to get, somebody who's drawing a 7-figure paycheck from AT&T onto the, state board of education. Like that's just not going to happen. And it feels like that's intentionally obscured so that you don't see how lopsided this ideological play is and how little it has to do with education. I was looking at the details of this thing. They give away the game in the details of this legislation. The bill's allowing parents who homeschool their children to be paid under the scholarship program. 10,000 kids, 10,000 homeschool parents are going to be getting paid. Like, fine, great, but like I think that that all work that happens in the home should be compensated one way or another. I think domestic workers are workers, but and all teachers are workers, but that's money that's coming out of a school. All of that money that they're doing for the most loosely regulated, let me tell you, man, what people are doing with homeschooling is wild. Some of it's great. And some of it is holy shit. The idea that money is being diverted away from actual, pedagogically sound public education into who knows what. It has nothing to do with their ideology. It's just money.
I want to add something here to the point that Ida was making earlier. This narrative, this conspiracy theory that are higher education institutions in the United States specifically are hubs for left-wing activity and left-wing ideology is fucking nonsense, especially in Florida and especially in South Florida, where anybody, and I'm a graduate of both of these universities, anybody who's vaguely familiar with the history of Florida International University and University of Miami knows that both universities have been a hub for the national security apparatus. They have served as a recruitment farm for the national security apparatus and have served as an outpost of the CIA and the intelligence service community in their coup attempts against other left-wing governments in Latin America. That is an outright fact. You know what I mean? These universities have served and continue to serve the project of United States empire. So it's just absurd, ahistorical, and idiotic to say that these universities are a hub of left-wing activity, because it's quite the opposite, and it's quite the opposite at the highest levels of what happens in those universities. I do want to switch a little bit, unless you have something to say about that, but I actually wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the union busting bill, because I know it's something that, people who listen to this podcast, if anybody's out there listening, would be interested in. And it is a complicated topic, right? I mean, there's a lot of specifics that go into those bills. And I also was wondering I think we've talked about this before, privately, but I was wondering if you agree with me that I know this bill has been filed before, but I do think that they're going so hard on it as revenge because of the fact that the Democratic gubernatorial candidate's lieutenant governor pick was the head of a teachers union. So I think it's petty revenge against that.
That's interesting. I hadn't actually thought of that. And I'll only say that because they've been going after teachers unions for a long time. But, the way that the bill has been written is that it carves out specific unions, specifically the ones that would be coined after like public safety. So the law enforcement union, the firefighters union, and the correction officers as well have been carved out of the bill. And the argument that the Republicans make is, oh, well, these are more deadly positions and therefore they need the unions, which again is in itself a counter argument, because like, what? Okay, so you're saying unions keep people safe or helpful, so why would you exclude anybody from it? But then the other layer too is that when you actually look at the Department of Labor statistics, a lot of the public unions impacted by this bill, like waste management, for example, linemen, all these different, and also 911 operators and juvenile justice officers. There's a lot of stuff in addition to teachers that are still included in this bill as public workers that would effectively, it's not an all outright like banning of unions. It just adds all these new requirements, makes it very hard to form a union or maintain a union. Things like how you can get your dues, things around certification, adds all these different bureaucratic layers to forming and keep maintaining a union. And so all that to say is, back to when you look at the Department of Labor statistics, waste management is actually the most deadly job in America, more deadly than any other job. And so
that's right.
Yeah. So if you're actually going to rate who gets the carve out based on the deadliest jobs, it actually should be waste management and linemen and these kind of jobs. And also, of course, teachers are the front lines of mass shootings and all these other acts of violence. And so that distinction is so flawed. It's also inherently racist and sexist, because a lot of the jobs they're carving out are mostly white men, whereas the jobs they are removing, the ability to collectively bargain and organize are teachers, who are majority women, and then of course waste management and cafeteria workers and all these jobs that are majority people of color. So it's also racist and sexist and just completely flawed. But it seems like the governor is specifically targeting teachers unions, which has often been the thing we knew is sort of the enemy number one. But I'm not saying it's perhaps not linked to some sort of retaliation, but it's constantly been teachers unions. And a part of it is, again, teachers unions are one of the larger and big Democratic donors. And so a lot of it is around, cutting the hand that feeds you, right? In the sense of the broader Democratic and progressive infrastructure. And so, that's generally what we expect and what we've seen, that we've been able to defeat year after year. But the governor coming out of it, of course, as we know in the current state of the state, it feels like if the governor says something, it will happen. But I also don't want us to feel completely disempowered by that. Again, teachers and teacher unions, have a lot of organizing ability in the state, relatively speaking. But like to your point, David, too, a lot of our base are folks that it's been designed that our base are not able to organize in the way that is necessary. Whereas you have all these like affluent stay-at-home folks that are just like able to go to school board meetings and yell about anything. Whereas like our base are generally people who have to work and who like can't stay in a meeting all day in the middle of the day to testify, right? And so again,
they can't go like get like matching T-shirts, like a bunch of like
right.
regalia, and show up and
right.
in the same Moms
right.
for Liberty
right.
outfits and stuff like that.
This is something Tomas and I've talked about a lot, but just the need in our own infrastructure to invest in. Sorry, say it again, Tomas.
I'll say, get a job, Republicans.
Yeah, that's right.
Off your ass.
Exactly. I mean. So yeah, it's so that there's some of the stuff around the attack on unions that that the governor has been alluding to since December. But the bill that's been introduced right now is the voucher expansion bill, and again, that bill has its first hearing tomorrow. But they're all interconnected, and I really want folks to see that all these fights on education, LGBTQ kids, Black history, banning books, union busting, privatization, vouchers, they're all the same fight to dismantle public education, to profiteer off of it, and to make sure that a certain class of kids don't have the same opportunities that others do, right? And again, those are families like mine that would not be able to succeed if it wasn't for public education. And so I've said this a lot, I think the media gets lost in like the culture wars. It's always been a class war, always. Because the folks who are more affluent are able to get the education they need, to go to a state, to get what they need. They can leave. It's those of us who don't have the resources that are going to be here and suffer the consequences. And so, it's the intersections of all of our identities. I know that word is triggering to Ron DeSantis, but he doesn't want us to realize that it's one collective fight. That's why they don't want us to learn this shit, right? And so it's just really important to remember it's always been a class war. The most impacted should always be leading and be at the center of it. But it's about building that race class solidarity on these fights. The far right is very good at divide and conquer, right? And that's why they also pick fights that they know communities are divided on. The fact the governor leaned in on Black queer theory in his speech was because he wanted to keep the Black community divided and fighting about LGBTQ issues versus the big picture around him just erasing an AP African American course, right? And so again, they pick these fights specifically to keep us divided among ourselves, which is why we really have to like zoom out and realize that our liberation is connected and that we are in this fight, us versus Ron DeSantis and his billionaires.
Just quick note. We should make why are we like these T-shirts, and they should just say it's always been a class war. We can quote you, Ida, too, so we don't take credit. But that
it's all yours.
Yeah, we'll put your at on there too. No, you talk about classes of people, you talk about different identities of people, but here's a class or an identity of people that have had it easy for way too long, if you ask me. Renters, and they are firmly within the sights of the Florida legislature. From FloridaWatch.org, perpetual tax on renters filed again in Tallahassee. Coalition of renters and advocates prepares. I know, right? It's time to start paying up non-property owners, and advocates prepare to defeat it again. So there's a whole. I mean, you can go check it out on FloridaWatch.org, or maybe Ida, you can just like walk us through what is this like. Oof. As if people who rent in Florida didn't already have enough stacked against them in terms of fees and costs, and just the concept that they're not that their money is like being used to support a landowning class. Like what's going on here, and how did this action item end up on the agenda, and what should we know about it?
I just want to say that in the few years that I've known Ida working in the legislature, I have to say, like, this is probably one of the bills that you hate the most. Like, you fucking hate this bill so much. It's so bad.
You can see it in her face. She's got such a happy face, but like you can see when the fire in the eyes kind of comes out a little bit, and you're like,
my friends. So one of the companies behind this bill is called LeaseLock, and some of my friends or who are in the trenches with me have said every time I say LeaseLock, take a shot, because I'm so obsessed with how bad these companies are, and I talk about them all the time. Like I've
Wait, real quick, Ida, do you know what they're trading under? I want to just make a real quick transaction. I want to go see if I can invest. I'm sure they're going to be raking it in the next few months. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, you're fine. So first of all, I will say this is the first anti-renter bill that's been introduced this session, but we expect more. We expect the Apartment Association and the Florida Realtors to put forward a full preemption of rent control. So right now, there's sort of a narrow window of rent control, which we talked about in our last conversation that Orange County was going to vote on. So there's a narrow window where you can pass rent control. You have to go through all these different hoops to do it locally, but you can. Our understanding is that the Florida Apartment Association and the Realtors are going to present a full-on preemption of it. We also are hearing they want to preempt the 60-day notice requirement and all these other local wins that have been passing across the state. This bill in particular, perpetual fees in lieu of security deposits, is such a grift. It's basically these companies out of state in like California, New York, they're all private equity backed, hedge fund backed. They are really disgusting. It's Rhino, LeaseLock, Jetty, Assurant, new ones sort of pop up. Some of the same money behind these companies are also the ones who built this renter's credit card. And they're also a lot of the same big private equity firms behind corporate landlords like Camden. So it's all connected, right? And it's basically this idea around creating these little fiefdoms of corporate apartments where you're profiteering off of this fake security deposit insurance piece, and you're profiteering off this credit card, you're price gouging rents, and basically just keeping people in constant cycles of debt. And then they can't escape, right? But this bill in particular, what it does is that it allows landlords to charge a perpetual non-refundable fee instead of a security deposit. They can either use these sort of phony insurance companies like the companies I just named, where they basically, it's an insurance for landlords, but not for renters. So if you owe any damages, you still have to pay it in full, even though you've been paying this like reoccurring or big lump sum just to live in your apartment. And you surrender a lot of your legal protections that you have under security deposits. So it's a whole other piece around your credit. We've seen record of these companies in other states where it would end up a $3,000 bill would turn to $6,000 and your credit's ruined. Maryland actually banned these companies from operating in their state because of their predatory actions. And so the bill, the way it's written, is actually has less consumer protections than the Texas bill. The Texas bill actually capped what landlords could charge. It also required landlords to buy insurance, and it required their Office of Insurance Regulation to regulate it. None of that is in this bill. There's no consumer protections. There's nothing saying security deposit can only be this amount, because the proponents of the bill argue, oh, well, this will get tenants in who can't afford a security deposit, and it's a choice. It's not a requirement. It's a choice. But there's nothing here saying that a landlord can't charge an exorbitantly high security deposit to force them to take this choice. There's no cap on what the amount of reoccurring fee is. And there's also no requirement that landlords actually buy even this fake insurance product with it, much less real insurance. And it's not covered by the Office of Insurance Regulation. And these are all amendments that we had introduced last session. Lawmakers put these amendments forward and they were all rejected. And so we defeated this bill. It passed the House and some Democrats voted for it, which is very disappointing. But we were able to defeat it in the Senate. Yep. Yeah, there is a Sun Sentinel piece that names the Democrats who voted for this. And the majority did not, but there was about 13 or 14 that voted yes on this bill when it hit the House floor. But we defeated it in the Senate, and the bill died last session. And so now it's been reintroduced. And so as you see, the advocates and the tenants are rallying again to defeat it. But this is just one of many fights that are ahead. And just in the housing world in general, the Senate president is planning to roll out a housing package that's likely going to include a lot of giveaways for developers. And this is another big just pet peeve of mine, because developers and all the money back behind them, right? These are worldwide private equity firms, and it's not just apartments. They're buying out single family homes, they're buying out manufactured home communities, right? It's the same money behind all of it. They've created a crisis, right? By creating, they have a finite good and they've been just have a monopoly on the market. So they've created this housing crisis, and now they're going to get public dollars to subsidize them to build more housing because of the crisis they created. And so it's really frustrating, these different developer incentives and giveaways, because it ultimately is just feeding the monster that created this mess, and it's not a sustainable solution. But it is one that a lot of folks, including housing advocates, look towards because it's maybe a short-term Band-Aid. But we do expect there to be a lot of pieces like that in this package. But we also are looking out for things that are, eroding the little tenant protections we have in the state. And really, security deposits are one of the only spaces where we have protections right now in tenant law. And this bill, House Bill 133, would completely gut them in Florida. Yeah,
the fee schemes, it bears noting, have been, this type of fee scheme has been found illegal in other states. Not Florida, and not Texas, but
right. Well, and it's basically payday loans 2.0. It's a poor tax. And it's just designed to keep folks relegated in poverty and tied to these companies. And so it's not necessarily surprising it's been refiled again, but folks are committed to defeating it.
AMSCOT, but for housing.
Well, and actually, it's not AMSCOT, but we are also expecting, I'm sorry to interrupt you, we are expecting not AMSCOT, but other predatory lending companies to also try to double their rates this year in the legislature. So that's another fight we're looking out for too. Sorry to interrupt you, Jared.
So just for the layperson, just so that I'm following, Tallahassee thinks that if you are a renter, you should be paying an insurance policy that protects your landlord, but not you, in the event that something bad happens.
Nailed it. That is
in an environment.
Nailed it.
That is insane. If I'm paying for an insurance policy, I should be benefiting from the insurance policy.
Yeah,
I'm paying for it.
Right, and they call it.
It's not really that surprising. Sorry, go ahead, Ida.
No, you're fine, David. They call it. LeaseLock calls it an insurance product or insurance technology, and these other companies use a surety bond, which is a whole other mess. But they use these words to try to paint it like something it isn't, like it's not insurance. There's no protection for the tenant.
Yeah, and if you've ever been a scumbag hood rat in going to UNLV and surviving on like less than $1,000 a month like me back in the day with a $400 rent. Like, if you're listening to this, you might not like identify this, but like when you're talking about things like getting bonded to get approved for an apartment, and when you're talking about like security deposits being a factor in whether or not you can get an apartment in Miami these days, and I think Orlando is kind of same. You have a lot of transplants, sort of high net worth people or tech bros or whatever coming here and maybe getting like a luxury rental for 6 months while they buy a place. Funnily enough, those aren't the people who are going to be affected by this kind of stuff. Like, those aren't the people who need to like show the credit necessary to just be able to live on a working class income, right? Like, this, again, just like the issue of education, this is an issue that is focused on maybe the bottom quartile of income earners. The people who are renting, the people who probably have bad credit, the people who need to get bonded in order to get approved for an apartment, move into an apartment complex or move into a building. And like, I'm seeing, I think it's not hard to see this through line of like all of the stuff that we're talking about that's going to be up for discussion is like really laser focused on a specific class. Again, this is something where it's like, these are poor people, these are working class people that are going to be most affected by if this perpetual tax on renters is able to pass.
Absolutely. And actually, my like advocacy mantra for 2023, I think the rest of my life, is that everything is a class war, because there's always somebody making money off of this. And
yeah, I'm gonna make money on those shirts.
Everything's a class war. But you just reminded me of something related but unrelated. I was in a meeting around LGBTQ work in Central Florida, and my wonderful friend, who is a drag queen and transgender, and she was sharing with me her frustrations with what's going on and her fear. And she said, Ron DeSantis is fucking with my livelihood. This is how I created a business. This is how I hire people and created jobs. This is how I got myself off the streets. He is fucking with my livelihood. And I just thought that was the most profound, important lesson on this assault on drag shows, LGBT, and just, she's distilled it for me in this way that I hadn't seen it before, because I'm not in that position of her, right? Mm-hmm. And same thing, recently you probably saw that there was an NHL job fair, and they were looking at diversity, and the governor's team said, how dare they look at diversity? Again, you're fucking with Black people's livelihood. Like let people get jobs. What are you doing, right? And so it's the intersections of so many things, but this is, I think the far right is getting very transparent now, because they feel like they keep winning, so they don't have to hide the lead, maybe, where it's absolutely about just annihilating communities that challenge their status quo, like LGBTQ people. It's indoctrinating people so they don't challenge the status quo, but it's also keeping people just relegated in poverty, but spinning it up so it's like it's not them, it's someone else doing it, right? And you looked at, again, of course, look at immigration. How many times do they say it's undocumented people taking your jobs away, when we know it is not? But again, that divides the working class, right? And so a lot of this is divide and conquer tactic, but I think we need to remember and distill these issues to building that class solidarity among different communities and people. Same thing when it comes to gender affirming care. The Board of Medicine is meeting February 10th to completely ban gender affirming care in Florida. This is the same governor that refuses to expand Medicaid. He is banning abortion. He is taking away healthcare from all of us, regardless of what we do, who we are, right? And so again, just distilling it to centering people impacted, but also creating that universal message, I think is really important, because all of this is connected. And again, I'll use the word that triggers a governor. It's all intersectional. It's all intersectional. And we just have to remember that and really support each other, particularly now when things are really, really dark and scary.
Yeah, Ida, you're going to get our podcast banned if you keep using those words.
Banned in Florida.
Well, I was going to say, I didn't want to sound, well, since we're on the subject, I had said before that the right loves accusing the left of doing things that they are in fact doing. I do work because I'll just say I'm skeptical of, I think that they will end up creating the backlash that they're most worried about, where if you create a moral panic around gay stuff, like LGBT stuff in schools or whatever, you're just going to encourage people who are LGBT to seek community elsewhere, i.e. online. I do worry about them saying we have to start regulating the internet to get rid of they'll say that there's grooming websites that are reaching out to gay kids and grooming them. And I do worry about them not talking about like big tech as like this like thing they're taking on, but a thing that they themselves would like to seek to control and purge elements of it that they find I don't know. I don't want to.
Yeah, like objectionable, like just blacklisting like nytimes.com in the public school system. Like you can't get to certain websites.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's fair. I mean, again, they say they're going after big tech when they actually have done nothing to hold big tech accountable. They carved out Disney out of the big tech bill. I mean,
they cut their taxes. That's all they ever did. Big tech
exactly.
Is cut their
and so again, when you think about how the accusations in our mirror, I mean, I think they absolutely have plans of that nature. You've seen it with abortion, right? Like you've seen that already happening. Yeah. So I think it's a very logical place to land. I also think, to your point, they know the fact that young people, if you tell young people not to do something, they're going to go do it. Like
they're going to do it. Exactly.
And so it's just, it will, I think, in so many ways, encourage students who weren't even thinking about these things to go pursue and go organize and do these things. But I think you're fair to assume you're 2 steps ahead of us as well.
But Ida, I wanted to ask you about the upcoming abortion ban bill that's expected in the state legislature, what that's going to look like. And then I also wanted to touch upon this anti-immigrant bill that is expected to be introduced. I mean, I'll just like set that up here, but Governor Ron DeSantis convened a grand jury that gave recommendations on the issue of human trafficking, right? As an excuse basically to pass more anti-immigrant policy in Florida. And what they want to do is they basically want to make it a 3rd-degree felony to transport or harbor undocumented immigrants in the state, which would mean like, if you bring in your undocumented cousin to Miami and they're living in your house, you could face a 3rd-degree felony. Or if you're in the car driving with your undocumented immigrant cousin and they're in the passenger seat and you get pulled over, you could potentially have a 3rd-degree felony. So I think that's obviously fucking insane and a massive overreach upon already overreaching an anti-immigrant policy in the state. But yeah, I just wanted to basically get the 411 on those 2 bills and what can we expect?
Yeah, 100%. So both those bills have not been introduced yet. Now on the abortion ban, I also want to highlight the fact that the New York Times did some really good research, I'm sure in partnership with some really great orgs, but the gist of it is that a lot of these exemptions we talk about, like exemptions for rape and incest, human trafficking, don't actually have impact because the patient isn't actually able to prove or to reveal these things, or that oftentimes abortion providers, the liability is so high to prove it. And so a lot of times these carve-outs, though they make good political headlines, and make the abortion bans look more moderate, don't actually help anybody. That's like statistically what has shown. So I want to lift that up. That was a story by the New York Times just this week. But in that same vein, so what we're hearing about an abortion ban in Florida, again, they just passed a 15-week abortion ban. And before then we were at, more sort of the standard of viability before Roe fell, which is around 24, 26 weeks. And so now what we're hearing is various things. We're hearing 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 6 weeks. So the bill's not been introduced. But we know that no abortion ban is a reasonable abortion ban, and these carve-outs also don't make a bill reasonable or more moderate. And so we're just waiting for some sort of legislation to be introduced. Same in the sense of the anti-immigration policies, which honestly, Tomas, I think there's going to be a lot more than just that one. I think there's going to be a lot of fights, but that bill has not yet been introduced. It also really reminds us of the similar tactic on anti-abortion bills around the snitch line piece that came from the Texas abortion ban, right? This idea of reporting your neighbors and things like that. When you read the bill, it speaks, or the draft bill that the grand jury wrote, it's a similar concept, which I will say the Senate president has indicated on the abortion ban. She's not support the snitch line kind of pieces. She actually reflected on how it reminds her when she read Anne Frank's diary growing up and how she does not like legislation that pits neighbors against neighbors. And so I also want to lift that up in the sense of this draft bill by the grand jury is very much that kind of policy language as well around a snitch line and really pitting communities against each other and people against each other, and businesses against each other, right? So I just want to lift those things up too. But the sad truth is, I don't think we've just seen a fraction of what's to come, honestly. And again, throughout session, things will fall from the sky. So I think we just have to be super vigilant, and remember that we're fighting one big collective fight and not allow ourselves to get divided, because that is what the far right is trying to do as well. They're trying to split our resources and make sure that we are fighting all these different fronts so they can keep fighting the one big fight. So we've just got to stay together and stand strong together.
Yeah. As we finish up, you guys have been really tough on Republicans, man. And I just have to say, like, maybe you haven't been paying attention, but there's something else that they're proposing this time around. DeSantis and the Florida Republicans ending the public health, ending COVID. They're going to end COVID, guys. Isn't that great?
All right.
They're going to actually end it. Yeah. So I've been waiting it's like, damn, why didn't somebody think of that a while ago? But we didn't really get a lot of time to get into it. But I just want to mention, too, that like 5.5 million Medicaid recipients are going to be reviewed for their qualification for coverage as a result of that. DCF says that almost 1 million current Medicaid recipients may make too much money to qualify and could be dropped from Medicaid. So not only are we not expanding Medicaid, we are under the rubric of having won and defeated COVID. Yeah, under that rubric, we are actually limiting more Medicaid. I don't know if you have any particular insight on that,
including for a lot of kids, apparently.
Yeah, half of them are children. That's right. Half of those.
I mean, you just stated how horrifying the picture is, and again, not just I'll throw a little heat at someone else besides the majority party, but just the general media is just doing a terrible job of covering this. They fall for every trap the governor sets. They basically just re-amplify everything he says, and it's so frustrating because he's always attacking them as the corporate media, and again, he knows very well that they're actually so on his side and doing everything he wants.
Yeah.
And the amount of times reporters are not actually just investigating and fact checking and just repeating just kills me. And, I had an old friend who told me the best Capitol reporters are the ones not in the building, because you just get lost in the building. You get lost in the political intrigue and the nuance, and your sources are all these Republican leaders who only tell you what they want to tell you, but you think they're telling you something secret. Mm-hmm. And so people just need to get out of the bubble and actually look behind the curtain on the stuff the majority doesn't want you to look at or talk about. And so I appreciate what y'all are doing to lift these things up, because these are things impacting everyday people that I firmly believe our base believe in, but also much of the Republican base too. But folks are just being hoodwinked and distracted by this massive media machine and the far right that are controlling it. And so just really appreciate y'all demystifying and really talking about the issues and the intersections of it all.
Don't underestimate the degree to which the media is happy to play along. I think there was Les Moonves at CBS said Donald Trump might not be good for America, but he's good for CBS. It is not going to hurt their bottom line if Ron DeSantis does some epic whiskey bacon ass quote about
that's it, Jared. That's exactly
it's going to get clicks.
Every single headline that I see. Every single headline that I see for about DeSantis is like, the media is basically like, can you guys believe how based this guy is? Oh my God.
Yeah. You're going to want to click on this.
They literally just repeat the fucking title of his press releases. I have an actual story for you guys here. So last year, I got kicked out of a Ron DeSantis press conference. Big fucking surprise.
Yeah, which one?
Yeah, you're going to need to be more specific, Doug.
Guys, I'm getting into it, okay? Please. Anyways, so it was at Miami-Dade College, and I was asking one of your favorite questions, Ida. I was like, why have you given, $525 million of tax? Why have you given these hundreds of millions of dollars of tax giveaways to woke corporations like Disney World? And of course, I got no answer. I got kicked out. And, I'm not going to name her because whatever, but I see this reporter at this other press conference that I was not kicked out from a couple of days later. And she turns to me and she says, by the way, that was a great question that you tried to ask at Miami-Dade College to the governor. And I was like, wow, thanks so much. They didn't kick you out. Why didn't you ask it as a follow-up? And, and she's like, well, the thing is that she literally said, we are not all independent like you. Some have to answer.
She doesn't want to get kicked out.
It's access. It's access journalism.
She said some have to answer to a higher power. And I was like, are you talking about your editors who are beholden to corporate overlords? And she said, exactly.
Advertisers.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, like that's what she said. So, you know, I mean, this is just, again, Ida, thanks so much for praising us, but we're just a rinkety dinky like podcast. Like, hello, Florida Press Corp, like do a fucking better job. And I'm saying that with some notable exceptions. You know who you are because I praise you. If I don't praise you, do a better job. You are failing. You are failing us, and we need you. We need you to do a better job. Anyways,
we really do. And also the other layer, I know we're out of time, but you know, there's more of these like far right blogs that are masquerading as media that are even giving like corporate
that's its own
media,
episode.
giving the corporate media a run for their money. And so I hope that the corporate media maybe has some incentive because their jobs are getting stolen by these far right machines. So maybe they're going to like actually do their work and speak the truth. So here's hoping.
Shameless plug, go read my quote-unquote investigation of Brendan Leslie, who runs that pay-for-play grift. It's on the Florida Squeeze. Let's go, baby. Go read it. Anyways, Ida, so before we finish, I know that your favorite time of the year is legislative session. I know you can't wait to go up to Tallahassee and battle it out. But my favorite time of the year is now, and it's Oscar season, when, you know, we get to debate and decide, guys, which are the favorite movies of the American public, which films have moved us. And I actually love film. I love going to the movies. I go to the movies by myself. It's like a very, I don't know, therapeutic time for me. So Ida, we wanted to ask you, what is your choice for film of the year, for picture of the year? You're in the hot seat. Yeah. Let's go.
Wait, who's nominated?
Okay, let's go through it. Okay, I'll give it to you right now.
Okay, well,
or you can just give us your favorite movie, but I can give you an idea of what's been nominated. Okay, what's been nominated for Best Picture is Top Gun: Maverick, Women Talking, fucking great movie, by the way. If you haven't seen Women Talking, like I would recommend seeing that. Everything Everywhere All at Once, my pick, that Tomas does not agree with. Banshees of Inisherin, with the god Colin Farrell. Triangle of Sadness, The Fabelmans by Steven Spielberg, his little magnum opus. All Quiet on the Western Front, Avatar: The Way of Water, Elvis, and Tar.
Wow, I didn't know they were allowed to have that many movies.
Yes, it's very indulgent. It's a very self-indulgent.
They expanded it after The Dark Knight didn't get nominated, and a bunch of 17-year-olds screamed. They expanded it.
So the only movie I've seen on that list.
Don't feel constrained by the Academy. Like,
I appreciate that. I don't watch enough films. Actually, it was a 2023 goal to go to see more movies. I haven't actually done that yet, but I had COVID in December, and so I did watch the Banshees of Inisherin when I had COVID. So I'm just gonna have to go with that one. That's the one I know. And you know, I'm nice, so.
I want to reboot the Banshees of Inisherin, like an Orlando version of it, but where like Anna just decides that she just doesn't want to hang out with you anymore, and she won't tell you why, and you're like, "What the hell?"
Right.
So our guest was Ida Eskamani. Ida, where can people find you on? Sorry.
Before we finish, we gotta give our picks too.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. You go, T. You go, T. What is your pick? I think I already know, but
I'm going with RRR or Top Gun Maverick. I can't pick one.
Oh, you do love Top Gun.
RRR, the Tollywood masterpiece that went direct to Netflix for most folks in the U.S. We did not get to see that in theaters. I don't think it was in theaters. And if it was a very limited release. But it was an incredible movie, not nominated. And Top Gun Maverick.
It got nominated for some of the music stuff.
Yeah, the music is incredible in that movie. Jer, how about you?
I do not have a pick that I feel strongly about for this year. But like I said before we started recording, I went Meg mode last weekend. I saw Megan, That is the film of this year. I'll see Renfield, that vampire movie, when it comes out in the spring. Guy, if you're listening to this, if you need to feel something communal with strangers, you need to laugh at a terrorist robot ripping the ear off a small boy who's been very terrible to a small girl. You need to get your blood pumping. You need to listen to this robot tell an entire group of people that it's over and she's in charge. It was so wonderful. I forgot what joy like that felt like before COVID.
Not since the final season of Girls has the Allison Williams hive been so strong. Like,
she was great too. She did a wonderful job. Yeah. She did a wonderful job. So I would say, if you want to return to your 2019 form, if you want to remember who you were before you had to spend too much time inside and going insane, go Meg mode. Go see Megan.
And for me, of course, my pick is Everything Everywhere All at Once, because I can relate to being a disappointing parent. I can also relate to being my second pick would be Tar, because I can also relate to being a misunderstood genius who's canceled before their time. So with that said, I do want to thank, we are at the top of the hour, like Tomas said. I want to thank Ida Eskamani. Ida, where can people find you on social media and such?
I am on Twitter for now, until I decide otherwise. And it is Ida_V_E. It's probably the best place.
That's all for this episode of Why Are We Like This? Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts for more episodes, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us at wawlt.com. Follow us on Twitter at Wolt Show, and on TikTok at Wolt Show. You can also email us at wolt@allpointswest.net. Until next time, this was Why Are We Like This? Wolt Mafia Rising.